Welcome to Shore Perspectives, a community feature of WESR Radio, highlighting the spirit of the shore from those who call it home.
My name is Paul Ewell, and I grew up in Hunting Creek, Justiceville, Virginia, on the Eastern Shore, Virginia. Basically, all watermen had, of course, boats, and the boats were the love of their lives, and their livelihoods depended on them. So they loved their boats. But a lot of watermen, when times were tough, they would drive trucks. So not only did you have trucks that hauled seafood, but if things were tight, a lot of watermen would go to truck driving. Ironically, or they would go work on tugboats, which is why you will see tugboats in the museum here, because that was a big part of their lives. But for fun, many of them were very into dirt track car racing. And as a kid, for me, the A&N Speedway in Tasley, which of course is long gone, it was the old Tasley Fairgrounds. That was where we went for the locals, the watermen went. Interestingly, for much of my childhood, we actually went to races 3 times a weekend. We went to Georgetown, Delaware, which is up the road here a piece, on Friday nights. We went to Del Mar on Saturday nights, and we went to Tasley or A&N on Sunday afternoons. And at all of these places, you found a lot of cars where there were watermen who raced them. They were almost all sponsored by trucking companies. So there was this interconnectivity between the three areas. My passion has always been the maritime culture of the Eastern Shore. And even as a small kid, I would, every day when I get home from school, I would go down to the railway and see what boats had been pulled or what boats were there, take photos, and then, of course, save up my money and go to People's Drug Store at Four Corner Plaza to mail them off to be developed. And I was just very passionate about the boats. I love them. I love to be on them. I love to work on them. And so for me, that was always a passion. When I went off to college, I kind of got away a bit. But I do believe in, to a certain extent, divine intervention. And I think God looked at me and said, no, you could do a lot of things, but I want you sticking with the things that you love. And that's what I've always loved. And so, just collecting photos, stories. All my family worked on the water, and even some of the women. And the rest of the women were married to watermen. And so I just kept collecting books and pictures and models and all this stuff over the years. And I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, I'm guessing, I used to do a lot of presentations. I still do a fair number of presentations, but somebody came up to me and said, why don't you open a museum? And I said, well, number one, I'm not a museum person. Sandra, my wife, is not a museum person. We're not museum people. I love museums, but I'm not a museum person. I consider myself more of a researcher than I do, And whoever I was talking to, I can't remember who it was, says, but if you had a place, people could come and bring photos that you could scan. I would rather have a box of photos than a box of gold, personally, of old boats and stuff. And so we said, well, let's think about this. And we were doing a temporary presentation. We did it a couple of years here at Onancock School. And somebody on the board came to us and said, why don't you set up a permanent place here? And I said, because we're not museum people. And she said, do it anyway. I think it's a good thing. So we did. We eventually rented a room upstairs and had a good turnout, helped us do our work, helped us with collections. We outgrew it. And then the Joni Donahue, who is the director of the Historic Onancock School, said, how about if we give you 3 times the space downstairs for just about the same rent? Because we're one of the few, if not the only, nonprofit. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. And so we moved downstairs. We have a lot more space. We could fill the whole building. We have storage units. Our goal was always to rotate stuff. We never rotate anything. But that's how we got here. And because people do know about us, they will, as you saw when you came in, people like Jim Lewis will come in and bring photos, and we'll scan them, and we have great conversations about and document the history, almost all of which I put in a database, and I'm trying to build a very comprehensive archive that will one day, not till I'm willing to let go of it, be donated to the Heritage Center at the Eastern Shore Public Library, so that folks, from now on, will be able to have it. We're well over 200,000 photos, many of which were scanned, a lot of which I took over the years, and that's just something we can't recreate that. And so we're not really a museum per se, but we start conversations. We're like the old general store, where people come in, especially men, they come in and no truth is ever spoken. Everything's a fishtail. Most of our stuff is donated. We have a few things on loan, but most of it's donated. We tried to represent as much of this heritage as we can. So you'll see model boats. We have a lot more model boats that we just don't have room for here, that demonstrate what a bi boat is, or what a dead rise is, or what a round stern is, those kinds of things. We have sample equipment like crab scrapes and crab pots and oyster dredges. I'm on the Eastern Shore. Oyster drudges, crab floats. We built a replica crab float, which was a lot smaller than what we had when I was coming along, but just so people could see this is what it looked like. It's funny because a lot of young watermen will come in now and they'll look at the crab float, the overboard kind of crab float, and they'll look at a crab scrape and they'll say something like, "I've never seen one in real life. I've only seen them in museums," which makes you feel good and old at the same time. But we have a lot of that type of thing. We do a lot with the National Working Waterfronts Network and the Archaeological Society of Virginia, where we try to document what things looked like, how they've changed drastically. Fortunately, on the Eastern Shore, things have changed slower. That's our very nature, but they've changed significantly. And so a lot of the folks that come in, they'll talk about, Jim Lewis and he grew up on Saxes, I grew up on Hunting Creek, and we were talking about how we don't know anyone there anymore. Most of the locals are gone. There are very few watermen, more on Saxes than certainly Hunting Creek or Deep Creek, or Onancock. But we try to represent that. I think a big thing with us is telling the story. My cousin Wanda, Guy, who is on our board, she always joked when I would say, "We're not going to be able to be there Saturday, will you?" And she'll be like, "Well, people want to see you." And she's grew up in this heritage as well. Her brother was a waterman, her dad was a waterman, all of our family were watermen. But I like to tell stories. And I'm the guy who, as a kid, loved to be around older people. And whereas a lot of kids my age would run, when older people at the store, at the railway, at the boatyard would start talking, I just absorbed it. I just loved the stories. And I think a good example of that is, this is also a you're getting old thing, but my best friend in the whole world was my grandmother. She was born 1894. Loved her more than life itself. When your best friend was born 2 centuries ago, you're getting old. But Grandma grew up, her father, her grandfather, all of her family, they were all oystermen. They owned skipjacks and bug eyes and drudged oysters, and she loved to tell the stories, and I loved to listen to them. And I think that's what we try to represent here. And we're in Onancock, but we do not just cover Onancock. We're about the Eastern Shore of Virginia. In fact, you will see stuff in here that's from Maryland. You'll see stuff that's from the Western Shore, simply because it has a connection here. If it didn't have a connection, it wouldn't be here. So our 501c3 is called the Watermen's Heritage Foundation of Virginia's Eastern Shore. That's the official name. The museum is the Eastern Shore Maritime Museum, because we wanted to try to broaden our, I don't want to say perspective, but our appeal. Because if you have people that are interested in the maritime history of the shore, but they're not really waterman oriented, we're like, yeah, we have tugboats. We talk about some things that are maritime, but it's shipbuilding. We built a lot of vessels were built here. In fact, from Onancock, most people don't realize this, but from Onancock to Saxes, many skipjacks, the official state boat of Maryland, many skipjacks were built here. Many of them were. And we've documented a significant number of those. So we're open generally Saturdays 10 to 3. Again, we're all volunteer, so we have to work around people's schedules. Some Saturdays we do have to close, But we can open by appointment. And we have a few people here that have keys. So if people want to say, I just want to come by, you don't have to start videos and do all that, but I just like to take a look around, we can probably set that up. The reason we study history, you've heard the old saying, those that don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. And that's why I try to instill that in my students. I don't teach history, but I instill in my students that we need to learn from the past. On the Eastern Shore, we need to know where we came from. The Eastern Shore was built on fishing and farming. Bottom line. No way around it. That's what built the Eastern Shore. And people need to know that. We need to celebrate it. It's a great thing. And we need to learn from it. You don't study history to regurgitate dates. You study history to learn the lessons you've already learned so that you don't have to learn them again. That would be my reason for people going to museums, for people learning the history and heritage of any locale.
For Shore Perspectives and WESR Radio, I'm Kelley Gaskell.